Thank you, everybody, for coming to the College Football Betting with Aaron Torres YouTube channel. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Go ahead, click that subscribe button. It helps our channel grow. It helps our audience grow. I appreciate it more than you know as we're talking college football on this channel year-round. Appreciate your support. Click that subscribe button. Viewing our preseason over-under win total pods. If you missed any of the big ones, we've done Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas, Florida, on and on and on. You can get them on podcasts. You can get them on YouTube. Go back, binge them all if you missed them. But today, we're turning our attention to the ACC, and we're turning our attention to a program that I am absolutely fascinated by, the Miami Hurricanes. Miami's over-under win total at FanDuel Sportsbook, 9.5 wins. Now, the money is coming in a little bit on the under, but at the same time, 9.5 wins, tied for most in the ACC alongside Florida State. And this is an intriguing football team. In terms of Miami, listen, year 3 of Mario Cristobal, right? Year 1, a couple years ago, you go 5-7. Last year, you go 7-6. On paper, that looks like only an incremental improvement. But let me play devil's advocate on that. Because if you actually go back and really look at what Miami did, I think they were a lot better and a lot closer to significant win improvement than you'd think. You go back and look. Remember, they start 4-0. That included a win over Texas A&M. They're in the top 20. And then, of course, the famous game, they're playing Georgia Tech. They have the lead, about a minute to go. Mario Cristobal can take a knee to end the game. Of course, he doesn't, and I'm not excusing him because we know what happens. There's a fumble. Georgia Tech ends up recovering, scoring a few plays later. That leads to a little bit of a downslide for those 2023 Miami Hurricanes. You lose to Georgia Tech. You lose to North Carolina the next week. Then you get a 2-game winning streak against Clemson and Virginia. You lose to NC State. You lose to Florida State at that point and Louisville as well. So that Georgia Tech game starts a skid in which you lose 5 of 7. Both the wins are in overtime. But I also think it's worth noting, okay? And this is not intended to just, throw shade at an individual person or player. But part of that skid really kind of, jived with Tyler Van Dyke, the then starting quarterback, really struggling, and not only struggling, being very turnover prone, okay? The Georgia Tech loss, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. UNC, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Lost to NC State, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. The loss to Florida State, in which he was not playing significant snaps, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception. So those 4 games, all losses. Let me take a quick look here, by the way. 3 of them really by a single score. You're talking about a situation where your quarterback simply did not take care of the ball enough. In those 4 games, 5 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 4 of those touchdowns coming in 1 game against North Carolina. So again, not excusing Mario Cristobal, not placing all the blame on Tyler Van Dyke, but at the same time, turnovers were an issue for this team, and I don't expect it to be as much going forward. So let's look ahead to this year's team. And part of the reason I don't expect it to be an issue going forward, I think there's a significant upgrade at the quarterback position. Cam Ward comes in from Washington State. If you remember, by the way, Mario Cristobal pulled off something I've never seen in this short portal era, this short NIL era. Cam Ward had declared for the NFL draft. He was gone. And then right before the deadline, Miami swoops in, convinces him to transfer to the U. And it speaks to, I don't know if it's strictly NIL, whatever, but you get Cam Ward in, and I think that single-handedly changes the trajectory of this program. Cam Ward, a guy that last season at Washington State threw for 3,700 touchdowns, 25 interceptions, and in 2 years at that school, 6,900 yards and 48 touchdowns. He's got a great wide receiver room. Xavier Restrepo, last season, 85 catches, over 1,000 yards receiving. Jacoby George, 57 catches, 864 yards, 8 touchdowns. And the other thing to factor in with this offense, Cam Ward, with his best wide receiver group, is also going to have a power run game, which we know is how Mario Cristobal wants to play. At the running back position, you get Damian Martinez, late in the spring portal cycle, 1,100 yards rushing for the Oregon State Beavers a year ago. And that offensive line is loaded and as good as anyone, certainly in the ACC, and it's up there with anybody in the country. Francis Mauioga, of course, last year's 5-star, started all 13 games as a true freshman and more than handled himself. Jalen Rivers was an all-ACC left tackle. This is a really talented team. On defense, let me also say this. That defense is sick, okay? Defense was solid overall, talent at all three levels. First off, yes, we talk a lot about the portal, but it is worth noting a couple very interesting players returning there. Ruben Bain, 12.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks last year. This one's interesting. Akeem Mesidor was an all-ACC player 2 years ago, 10.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, gets hurt last year, barely plays. Well, he's back. Tyler Barron, by the way, 10.5 TFLs at Tennessee. This is an interesting story. Leaves Tennessee, commits to Ole Miss in the portal, never enrolls, goes to Louisville, and after a semester at Louisville transfers to Miami. Whatever, he's at Miami. That's all that matters. He is a stud. So the front line is elite. The linebackers, Francis Mauioga's brother, Francisco. I mean, to quote Elf Francisco, that's fun to say. Well, guess what? You know what else is fun? Watching this dude play linebacker. Stats are insane from this kid a year ago. 82 tackles led the team. 18 TFLs led the team. 7.5 sacks led the team. He's back. You have some other pieces at the linebacker spot. And then the secondary, it is a little bit inexperienced. If there's such a thing as, I think, a weak spot on this defense, it is probably the secondary. But Daryl Porter's a star. Michelle Powell transfers from Washington. And you got dudes on all three levels. Powell, by the way, started all 15 games for last year's national runner-up. So you got yourself a really good team. Now, obviously, when evaluating an over-under win total, it is, again, 9.5 for the Miami Hurricanes this year. It is worth noting you always got to look at the schedule, right? And the schedule, to me, is very interesting. So you open at Florida. If you've listened to any of these pods, you know that I'm not a Billy Napier guy. I don't believe in him. I think there's a chance he's not back in 2025. But I'll also say this. The Swamp opening day, that fan base is going to be ready. That fan base wants to believe that Billy Napier is the guy. They're going to get things figured out. And I'll give credit where it's due. Graham Mertz was actually pretty good last year for Florida, so that's not a gimme. But remember, Miami is a slight favorite right now going into this game. But then after that, obviously, look, there's a lot of depth issues in the ACC as far as how good the league is. There's a lot of winnable games. After Florida, 3 of your next 4 are at home. Florida A&M, Ball State at South Florida, which is kind of an interesting one down in Tampa. And then also Virginia Tech at home. You have at Cal, which is now an ACC game, at Louisville, and then Florida State. And then from there, the back half of the schedule, or the back quarter of the schedule, I really should say, is very manageable. Duke at home, Manny Diaz, first-year head coach, at Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and at Syracuse. And so even by ACC standards, the ACC, obviously, it's not the Big Ten. It's not the SEC. But even by ACC standards, that's pretty manageable for the Miami Hurricanes. You don't have Clemson on the schedule. You don't have NC State, which we're recording this before the AP Top 25 comes out, but that's probably going to be a fringe Top 25 team. You don't play either of those teams. You do have to go to Louisville, but remember, that's a team that lost a lot off of last year's ACC runners-up, and you get Florida State at home. Florida State is the ACC champ, but that was a 1-touchdown game. That was a 1-score game last year, and that game is in Miami. And so when I look at this team and I look at this schedule, I got to be honest. You talk about one of my favorite over-under win totals of the 2024 season, it's Miami at 9.5. Listen, I think they could struggle against Florida. I think Florida State isn't going to be easy, but it's at home. You have no Clemson, you have no NC State, you have no UNC, which always has talent. There is a lot of wins on this schedule. But what I would also say is this. I think rather than just taking the over-under at plus money on the over, what I think is actually intriguing is this. Right now at FanDuel, plus 440 for Miami to win the ACC. I think that is great value. I think if you play this season 10 times, I think they're going to win it about 4.5, 5 times because they have the most talent. They get Florida State at home, no Clemson, whatever. They're going to be in great position, even if they lose to Florida. So put aside the over-under. Even if they lose to Florida, remember, you are going to win the ACC. You lose one game in the ACC wherever, you get to then go to the ACC championship game and have a chance to win it. So I like this over a lot. Again, the over-under win total is 9.5. I like the over at plus 138. But the other thing that really intrigues me, ACC championship odds, plus 440. Listen, Mario Cristobal's got a lot to prove, but whatever you want to say about Mario Cristobal, remember, 2 of his last 3 years at Oregon, when he really got it rolling, they won the Pac-12. 3 out of 3 years, they played for the conference championship. Now, it's a little quirky because one of those years was COVID. Washington qualified for the Pac-12 championship game, but could not play in it because of COVID. But I just bring it up because when Mario Cristobal got it rolling at Oregon, whether you like him, whether you don't like him, whatever, he had his teams in position to compete for conference championships and win conference championships as well. So I like the over at plus 128 of the 9.5 wins. I also like plus 440 to win the ACC. All right, I think that's it for this episode of College Football Betting. If you are not subscribed to this podcast feed, what are you doing? Do it on Apple, Spotify. As I mentioned, go ahead, do me a quick favor, leave a 5-star rating and review. Please do that for me. I would appreciate it. Also, make sure to find College Football Betting with Aaron Torres on YouTube as well. Just search College Football Betting with Aaron Torres. All right, I think that's all for this episode. We'll be back tomorrow, or soon anyway. Maybe not tomorrow, but we'll be back soon. Next episode, I think we're going to stay in the ACC. Think we're going to go ahead and go to Florida State's biggest, or Miami's biggest rivals, the Florida State Seminoles. Reigning ACC champs. We know how the season ended, and we know they lost quite a bit off last year's team. We'll be back talking Florida State